Good afternoon, I'm Dilek Tuna and you're watching A News. Now the major stories making headlines today. Giorgia Meloni and Donald Trump talked up chances of a US trade deal with Europe as the Italian Prime Minister visited Washington. High-level officials from the US, Europe and Ukraine met, pushing for a collaborative approach for peace. Deputy Foreign Ministers of Azerbaijan, Georgia and Armenia hold a first trilateral meeting in Tbilisi. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni met with President Donald Trump at the White House, where they discussed European Union tariffs, a key issue on the agenda. The two leaders, who share long-standing ties, aim to lay the groundwork for a potential trade deal with the EU. Our correspondent Ube Shahbandar has more from Washington, D.C.
Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni is in the White House on Thursday to meet with longtime friend and ally President Trump. At the forefront of the agenda for their talks will be the potential for a trade deal between Washington and the European Union. Meloni is one of the few EU leaders with long-standing positive ties with Trump. In response to a question by the press on whether the European Union still views the United States as a reliable trading partner following President Trump's Liberation Day executive orders that issued wide-sweeping tariffs, Meloni responded, quote, "I'm here to work to make the West stronger. I believe in the West unity and that we have to talk and find a middle way to grow together." President Trump said that he believes that he could reach a deal with the European Union, but he cautioned it will have to be a fair deal.
We've had numerous talks, very at the highest level, frankly, with other countries. Yeah, we're doing very well, and we're moving along on trade very well. The United States was ripped off and taken advantage of by every country in the world, practically. I mean, I have to say practically, but just about everyone. That's not going to happen anymore, but we're going to make fair deals.
I'm sure we can make a deal, and I'm here to help on that. I cannot deal in the name of the European Union. My goal would be invite President Trump to pay an official visit to Italy and understand if there's a possibility when he comes to organize also such a meeting with Europe.
The two sides have a 90-day window to negotiate a settlement before tariffs rise steeply. Meloni is the first European leader to meet with President Trump at the White House since he announced those tariffs. President Trump also told reporters that he considers Meloni one of the real leaders of the world. Meloni's meeting with President Trump may offer the EU the deal that many on the continent are hoping for. EU countries are widely concerned of the economic impact that a 20% U.S. tariff could have, given the high volume of trade with the United States. The unique nature of Meloni's relationship with Trump offers Italy leverage in EU affairs as well. Meloni's close ties with the Trump administration is seen by many Italians as useful to hedge against the French-German axis that dominates EU affairs. Meloni's government has been calling on the EU to adopt a softer approach towards President Trump and his tariffs. At nearly 40 billion euro, Italy's trade surplus with the U.S. is the third largest among EU countries. I'm Ube Shahbandar for A News, Washington, D.C.
US President Donald Trump says China has reached out after the latest round of tariffs. While he stopped short of confirming direct talks with President Xi Jinping, Trump says communication is happening at high levels. Trump says that a deal with Beijing is likely, but warned that if not, the US will move forward on its own terms. He also announced a delay on the TikTok agreement, saying it will wait until trade issues are resolved. The US currently has tariffs totaling 145% on Chinese goods.
I have a very good relationship with President Xi, and I think it's going to continue. And I would say they have reached out a number of times.
Xi or they?
Well, the same. I view it very similar. It would be top levels of China. And if you knew him, you would know that if they reached out, he knew exactly. He knew everything about it. He runs it very tight, very strong, very smart. And yeah, we're talking to China. Well, we have a deal for TikTok, but it'll be subject to China, so we'll just delay the deal till this thing works out one way or the other. And I think it's a good deal for China. The TikTok deal is very good. TikTok is good for China, and I think they'd like to see us do a deal, especially the deal that we have pretty much done with some of the best companies in the world.
Chinese President Xi Jinping met with Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Manet in Phnom Penh on Thursday on the final leg of his Southeast Asian tour. Cambodia's government says the two countries have signed and exchanged 37 documents during Xi's visit. They cover areas such as investment, trade and finance. Beijing has already invested billions of dollars in Cambodia's infrastructure, including roads and airports, and is the country's largest creditor. Xi's visit follows stops in Vietnam and Malaysia and comes in the wake of US tariffs that have impacted the region. The price of everyday essentials like Nike, Levi's jeans and Gap t-shirts could soon spike in the US as fresh tariffs threaten the Asian factories at the heart of the global clothing supply chain. A wave of new trade measures is already disrupting key manufacturing hubs like China, Vietnam and Indonesia.
The American consumer may soon feel the pinch as new tariffs reshape global trade dynamics. In 2024, China, Vietnam, and Indonesia accounted for 95% of all Nike footwear production, a staggering concentration now under threat. The U.S. has already slapped significant tariffs on Chinese goods, while Vietnam and Indonesia face 10% tariffs that could rise by July unless new trade deals are reached. Vietnam is particularly in the spotlight, suspected of being an indirect entry point for Chinese goods, either through rerouted shipments or by incorporating Chinese components into exports. This has placed Vietnam and companies dependent on its supply chains, like Gap, in a precarious position. Gap shares have dropped 14% since President Trump's tariff announcement on April 2nd. Nike has seen a 14.7% decline, and Levi's stock is down 10.6%. But the impact doesn't end with fashion. Technology companies are also deeply connected with Chinese manufacturing. Nearly 90% of gaming consoles sold in the US, from Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo, are assembled in China. Apple continues to outsource most of its assembly operations there. NVIDIA, a leader in AI and graphics technology, relies on Chinese components and contracts Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company to produce its chips. Meanwhile, American agriculture is bracing for another hit. During the first U.S.-China trade war from 2018 to 2019, U.S. farmers lost billions in revenue. Now, history may repeat itself. Analysts warn that about 15% of U.S. farm exports went to China in 2024, with the soybean industry especially vulnerable as China remains its largest buyer. As tensions rise and stock prices tumble, the economic impact of these tariffs is set to ripple across multiple sectors, from the clothes we wear to the tech we use and the food we grow.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has accused China of supplying weapons and gunpowder to Russia, his first direct claim of Chinese military support in the war. Speaking at a press conference in Kyiv, Zelensky said intelligence also suggests China is producing weapons on Russian territory. Moscow and Beijing haven't yet commented on these accusations. However, China has previously denied any involvement in the war. The allegation threatens to further strain relations between Kyiv and Beijing as China continues to present itself as neutral despite strong economic ties with Moscow.
I think it's important information. It's not very pleasant. We finally received information that China is supplying weapons to the Russian Federation, and we are ready to talk about it in detail. Today, we have general information from the security service, from reconnaissance, and I think we will be able to talk about it in great detail next week, especially about the data that we believe that Chinese representatives are engaged in the production of some weapons on the territory of Russia.
A missile strike has hit the northeastern Ukrainian city of Kharkiv on Friday morning, killing one person and injuring more than 70 others, according to local authorities. The attack comes as both sides accuse each other of violating a US-brokered ceasefire on energy infrastructure.
5 children were among those injured in Friday's attack on Kharkiv, which killed one person and injured more than 70 people. That's according to local authorities, which says apartment buildings, an educational institution and a civilian enterprise were damaged. Kharkiv Mayor Ihor Terekhov says at least 15 residential buildings were hit. Residents say it was a frightening time.
We were asleep. I saw some kind of flash, I don't know where. Everything flew around. There was smoke. My wife took our daughter from the room there and gave her to me. We covered her in a blanket. We first thought the blood on her was mine, but then we found out that she had a shrapnel injury near her eye.
Everything was tossed around in every single room. Glass shattered everywhere, just everything.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russia has shifted its focus from targeting energy sites to hitting civilian infrastructure. It's despite a US-brokered ceasefire agreement which put energy facilities off limits. Though Moscow reduced direct attacks on the power grid, Zelensky warned the overall volume of missile and drone strikes remains unchanged. At a United Nations Security Council meeting on Thursday, Russia claimed Ukraine has launched more than 120 strikes on its energy infrastructure, which Kyiv denies.
The United States hails diplomatic talks in Paris on Thursday an encouraging reception. The discussions to end the war in Ukraine focused on a key proposal for a multinational force of up to 30 countries to oversee any future agreement. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's office called the talks constructive and positive, and President Donald Trump says Kyiv and Washington could sign a minerals and economic cooperation deal as soon as next week.
European powers say they're keen to ensure their role in shaping the future of Ukraine. High-level officials from the US, Europe and Ukraine met in Paris on Thursday, pushing for a collaborative approach for peace. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff with senior officials from France, Britain and Germany. The so-called E3 were at the Élysée Palace. A key proposal was the creation of a multinational peacekeeping force, potentially involving up to 30 countries. However, its deployment depends on US military support, which has not yet been confirmed. A senior advisor to French President Emmanuel Macron called the talks honest and open. The talks will continue next week.
The Europeans, the Ukrainians and the Americans who have agreed to meet next week in London to continue discussions on this basis so that we can hope in the very near future to achieve a full and complete unconditional ceasefire, to which the Ukrainians have already agreed and to which we hope Russia will agree in turn.
While the discussions in Paris were viewed as progress, it remains unclear whether all parties will agree to the proposed terms. French President Emmanuel Macron says it's important for European and Ukrainian unity.
And I think this is a very important occasion to have convergence with our Ukrainian friends and amongst the Europeans alongside with you, because I think everybody wants to get peace, for sure, and a robust and sustainable peace. And this is a question we clearly will pursue. And now the question is about the phasing, the way to approach this resource, which is the one we do wish.
Meanwhile, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov told Rubio that Moscow was ready to continue joint work with Washington to eliminate the long-standing causes of the Ukraine conflict. The upcoming meeting in London is seen as an important step in ensuring the peace talks remain fair and balanced as both sides navigate the complexities of the conflict.
Thank you very much. That's a very
US airstrikes on Yemen's Ras Isa oil port has killed 38 people and injured more than 100 others, according to Houthi-run media. The US Central Command confirmed the strike, saying it targeted a key fuel supply point for the Iran-backed militants. The attack aimed to weaken the Houthis by cutting off a major source of illicit revenue funding their operations. Meanwhile, Israel says the Houthis later launched a missile toward Tel Aviv, which was intercepted. The conflict continues to escalate, with the US also accusing a Chinese satellite firm of aiding Houthi attacks, a claim Beijing has yet to comment on. A deadly shooting has rocked Florida State University Thursday afternoon after a 20-year-old who is the son of a Leon County deputy opened fire near the campus student union. 2 people were killed and at least 6 people were injured. The alleged shooter was shot by police and taken into custody. The suspect reportedly used his mother's former service weapon and had a shotgun at the scene. He remains hospitalized and police have not yet identified a motive. The 2 people killed were not students and their names have not been released. This is the second shooting at FSU in more than a decade.
The alleged shooter was also a long-standing member of Leon County Sheriff's Office Citizen Advisory or Youth Advisory Council. So he has been steeped in the Leon County Sheriff's Office family, engaged in a number of training programs that we have. So it's not a surprise to us that he had access to weapons. This event is tragic in more ways than you people in the audience could ever fathom from a law enforcement perspective. But I will tell you this, we will make sure that we do everything we can to prosecute.
Severe rainfall has hit Italy's Piedmont region on Thursday. The extreme bad weather has triggered landslides and flooding across several provinces in northwest Italy, putting it on red alert. Strong winds and torrential rain have disrupted transport and prompting authorities to restrict access to high-risk areas. More than 400 firefighters were deployed, with more than 300 emergency interventions reported, especially in Turin and Biella, where the Alvo River overflowed. Scientists believe they have detected the strongest possible signs of life on a distant planet outside the solar system. Chemical fingerprints of gases normally found on Earth have been found on the exoplanet named K2-18b. It could predict microbial activity and potentially be a landmark discovery.
Are we the only living beings in the universe? That's the question so many people have been wondering about for centuries. Well, now, scientists believe they've discovered the first potential chemical signatures in gases that could suggest there might be life elsewhere in the solar system. Researchers used the James Webb Space Telescope and found that the exoplanet named K2-18b has an atmosphere that possibly contains dimethyl sulfide and dimethyl disulfide, which are produced exclusively by living organisms, primarily marine microbes on Earth. Lead researcher Professor Nico Madhusudan from the University of Cambridge says that while this is not a confirmation of life, it could be a strong candidate for a biosignature.
We have found signs of biosignature molecules, either DMS or DMDS or both of which are produced uniquely by life here on Earth and have been predicted to be biosignatures on planets around other stars as well. And we found the strongest evidence to date on a biosignature molecule, in this case a combination, potentially around another star outside the solar system. And that is a major breakthrough in our search for life beyond the solar system. Not only that there is a chance that the planet can actually be habitable, but what we are finding is that we are demonstrating that it is possible to detect biosignatures around in atmospheres of such planets around nearby stars with existing facilities, and that's a big breakthrough.
The planet is 124 light years away in the Leo constellation and orbits within the habitable zone of a red dwarf star. But scientists say more research needs to be done.
So we want to observe more to get it to a 5 sigma level, less than a chance in a million, a part in a million of a fluke. But we also want to do more theoretical and observational studies to make sure that there is absolutely no other way we can make this molecule without life. I think it is our responsibility as scientists and as part of a society that we want to answer this very deep question in a very careful and robust manner. But the excitement is still there, nevertheless, that we've got the capability to do it now.
While the professor adds that this is a monumental and important discovery, he adds that they also have to be extremely cautious.
A trilateral meeting between the deputy foreign ministers of Georgia, Azerbaijan and Armenia took place in Tbilisi. Azerbaijan was represented by Deputy Foreign Minister Alnur Mammadov. According to officials, the discussions were focused on prospects for regional cooperation. The deputy foreign ministers of the three countries exchanged views on advancing collaborative efforts in the South Caucasus region. Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has officially declared his government's intention to remove references to territorial claims on Karabakh from the country's constitution, a long-standing demand from Azerbaijan in the ongoing peace process.
Prime Minister of Armenia Nikol Pashinyan stated that Armenia's new constitution should exclude references to the 1990 Declaration of Independence, which has been seen as the legal and ideological basis for claims over Azerbaijani territories. Although the current constitution does not explicitly mention the annexation of Karabakh, it references the declaration which cites the 1991 decision by separatist forces to join Armenia. Azerbaijan has consistently insisted that the removal of such references is a prerequisite for signing a final peace agreement. Despite a general consensus on the treaty's content, Baku maintains that it will not sign the deal until the Armenian constitution no longer implies territorial claims. Azerbaijan also continues to demand a joint statement declaring the dissolution of the OC Minsk Group's mandate. Pashinyan has now instructed officials to begin drafting a new constitution to be put to a national referendum, tentatively scheduled for May 2026 to coincide with parliamentary elections. The Prime Minister justified the decision on internal political and legal grounds rather than external pressure, suggesting the declaration's principles contradict Armenia's current statehood. Nevertheless, domestic challenges persist. Opposition forces in Armenia, some of which continue to leverage the Karabakh issue, are seeking to undermine the government's legitimacy ahead of the vote. Forecasts suggest that the Pashinyan's party may struggle to retain a parliamentary majority, placing the referendum's outcome in doubt. Meanwhile, Armenia has linked the dissolution of the OC Minsk Group to the peace treaty's finalization, a stance Baku opposes. Azerbaijani officials argued that all conflict resolution mechanisms must be dismantled if the conflict is officially declared over. Pashinyan's recent remarks reflect a shift in political tone, yet experts note that real progress hinges on two developments: formal approval of the new constitution and the removal of all remaining structures tied to the conflict, including the Minsk Group. Without these, a lasting peace agreement remains elusive.
Turkey has pledged major support to Syria's rebuilding efforts following the end of a 13-year civil war and the fall of the Assad regime. On an official visit to Damascus, Turkey's Trade Minister Omar Bolat laid out plans for wide-ranging cooperation in trade, infrastructure and institutional development.
Turkey says it will help Syria develop institutional capacity and address infrastructure deficiencies. The announcement was made by Trade Minister Ömer Bolat on Thursday during an official visit to Damascus. He spent 2 days in the Syrian capital meeting with top government officials and business leaders. The trip focused on reviving cooperation in trade, customs, transportation, investment, finance, banking, contracting and energy partnerships. Bolat held talks with the country's economy and industry minister Nidal Al-Shar, Finance Minister Mohamed Yasser Barnier, Transportation Minister Yarub Suleiman Badr, and the head of the land and sea ports, Qutayba Ahmad Badawi. During the meetings, Bolat congratulated Syrian officials on what he described the country's December the 8th revolution, which marked the end of a devastating civil war that had ripple effects across the region, including in Turkey. Speaking to members of the Damascus Chamber of Commerce, Bolat pledged Turkey's full support for Syria's reconstruction efforts.
Infrastructure, economic legislation and institutional capacity are now being re-established in Syria, and the government of Turkey will support the development of institutional capacity and infrastructure deficiencies to the extent requested by the Syrian government. Like all ministries in Turkey, we have been instructed by our president to support Syria. The establishment of a new free Syria here will be your work, and we, as your Muslim brothers and neighbors, have the duty to support you.
Bolat says that Turkey stands ready to share its experience and technological capabilities with the Syrian people. This visit signals a major step forward in regional cooperation and Turkey's readiness to support the country's path to recovery.
That's all for now. Keep watching A News for all the latest updates.